very good afternoon to Dr. Chan, ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever wondered how fatal assumptions can be? Today, my group and I will be presenting a case study on Singapore Airlines Flight 006. I'm Victor, and I'll be touching on what happened and some background information. Xian will be covering on the investigation findings. Yang will be touching on the topic of assumptions, followed by Ivan, who will be discussing on why do people assume. Last but not least, Shawn will conclude our presentation. So now, why SQ006? First of all, Singapore Airlines is an established company, and we want to show that even though it's an established company, accidents can still occur to them, as well as to anyone who is not careful. Secondly, there were communication problems between the air traffic controllers as well as pilots. So this is in line with the topics that are discussed. And last but not least, lessons can be learned and applied. In this case, we can learn that one should not assume, as well as one should be responsible for their own roles. So actually, we can integrate these into our lives when we enter the working society. Okay, now I'd like to show you a video on what exactly happened.
Sound cable is before.
So what happened during the process, actually, there was a very heavy typhoon. So the aircraft tried to take off as soon as possible before the typhoons actually worsened. So if the crosswinds reach 30 knots, the crew will have to abandon their takeoff, which will result in flight delays. So actually, the pilots verified with the air traffic controllers before they take off their exact location. So now they are using their throttle to full throttle to take off. So as they accelerated to take off speed, they crashed into construction tools on the runway itself. So the fuselage was actually torn into two, and the fuel in the wings exploded, which resulted in a fire, causing deaths. Okay, so now let's move on. So Singapore Airlines Flight 006, this is the airline's first major incident, and it occurred on 31st October 2000 at Chiang Kai-shek Airport, Taiwan, now known as Taiwan Taoyuan International Airport. So out of the 159 passengers and 20 crew members, there were 83 fatalities and 71 were injured. So basically what happened was a Boeing 747-412, a variant of the Boeing 747-400 series, took off at the wrong runway and collided with the construction equipment along the runway. So as seen from the video, just now the pilots attempted to take off as soon as possible before the typhoon worsened, which may cause a delay in flight schedule. So they actually made a wrong turn. As shown from the picture above, they made an early right turn into 05R, which is the wrong runway with construction equipment on it. The actual runway should be 05L. So why did this happen? This is due to the poor visibility of the typhoon, and the strong winds caused the aircraft to move very slowly. After which, before they take off, clarifications were actually made by the pilot to the air traffic controllers twice. The air traffic controllers actually confirmed their location despite knowing the exact location of the aircraft on ground, which resulted in the crash. Okay, so now for more background information, the pilot on duty was Fong Chi Kong, 41 years old, with more than 11,200 total flight hours. And just only on the Boeing 747-400 series, he flew a total of 2,000 hours. The co-pilot was Latif Xian, 36 years old, with a total of 2,400 flight hours. And the relief pilot was Mr. Ng Keng Leng, 38 years old, 5,500 total flight hours. So as you can see from the pilots itself, they are actually very competent. So there were also other factors which contributed to the crash. The typhoon actually caused poor visibility, and it hastened the judgment of the pilots. Okay? And the airport, without a ground radar, the air traffic controllers couldn't confirm the actual location of the aircraft on ground, which resulted in an assumption made that the aircraft was actually on the correct runway, which resulted in a crash. Now I'll hand over the time over to Xian, who will be talking about the investigation findings.
Thank you, Victor, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Xian, and I will continue with the findings. I've divided into 4 main parts so that you can better understand what's going on. I'll start with the first interview. The first interview took place within hours after the accident because the investigator believed that human memory fades over time. Therefore, this interview is very crucial for the start of the investigation. As you can see, the pilot mentioned that there was something on the runway. That's why the investigation team knows what they will be looking out for, and they went on to the site to begin their investigation. After close examination, they found tire tracks on runway 05R, which shouldn't be the case as 05R has been closed for a while. And later they concluded that the plane actually took a wrong turn into 05R instead of going to 05L. Hence, collided with the construction equipment on 05R and led to the accident. After knowing this shocking fact, the investigator interviewed the pilot for the second time. After confirming that the pilot did receive the notice of closure of 05R, he told the pilot that they were actually on the wrong runway. However, the pilot was still very sure that he was on the correct runway. As you can see, the pilot mentioned that the controller would have said something if they were on the wrong runway. This shows that the pilot assumed that the ATC gave them clearance because the ATC could see their exact location. And at the same time, the ATC also assumed that the pilots were experienced enough not to make such mistakes. That's why he gave them the clearance to take off without having any visual confirmation. Now, let's continue on with the main investigation. A simulation was conducted to better understand the situation. From the simulation, the investigation team knows that there were no clear indication to notify the pilots that the runway was closed, and due to the bad weather, the pilots have reduced their speed by almost 3 times. Therefore, it took them longer to make a turn, and hence end up. And hence, when they see the runway, the pilots assumed that it was the correct runway, and they turned into that wrong runway, and resulted in a fatal accident. Now, let's move on to the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, which is part of the black box. From the CVR, we know that the crews actually followed all the standard operational procedures closely. The communications were clear and the pilots were calm and focused at all times. However, there's one thing I want to highlight from the CVR is that the investigation team actually realized that the accident could have been avoided if the pilots made effort to do things right without making any assumptions. The SQ006 have their peril visual display activated. This PVD is a system on the plane that allows the pilot to maintain their position on the center line of the runway. From the CVR, the co-pilot mentioned that the PVD had not light up, but the pilot simply ignored the co-pilot and claimed that he could see the runway just fine. The pilot assumed that he can take off without the aid of the PVD, and at the same time, the co-pilot, out of respect for the pilot, assumed that the pilot was right and did not further question him. From what I have discussed, we know that assumptions can lead to fatal consequences. So what about the effects on assumptions on our daily life? Xian will tell you more about it.
Okay, thank you Xian for part of key findings. Good afternoon everyone, I'm Xian, and here I am to present to you on the learning point that my group has pointed out, which is assumptions. Basically, as you know, assumption is in us. Okay, we are all human beings. We tend to assume first before making a decision. However, assumption may lead to negative consequences, but how many of us here really think about it? Just a recap, as you know, the co-pilot and pilot exchanged words, whereby the co-pilot sounded out that, hey, actually, the pilot was on the wrong runway. However, the pilot assumed and stood by his decision that he was on the right runway. So I feel that this is the turning point for this whole incident. If the pilot were to think it further, right, this can be avoided. He didn't foresee circumstances which might happen, and also a consequence which is disastrous. Next thing, for the definition of assumption, as you can see here, a thing that is accepted as true or rather certain to happen without proof or checking. The keyword here is accepted as true and also without proof or checking. Let me give you a brain teaser. Can anyone guess the next number? Come on. However, that is your assumption. But do you ever check? Okay, remember the definition. Actually, it must be greater than 20. So actually, the answer is B. Alright, that's your assumption. Alright. Let me bring you to another example, which is, let's say you have stomachache coupled with fever. Alright, your body is healthy. Alright, then you pop some pills and that's it. You're fine. However, one fine day you went to consult a doctor. The doctor told you that actually you have stomach cancer. It's too late. Your assumption, alright, your assumption is you are healthy. However, the consequences is actually that. Alright, you might ask me, why am I so critical about this? This touches your life. How about making an assumption which touches on other people's life? Let's take a look at this video. It's just a short video.
Now, almost 13 minutes after takeoff, and at 17,300 feet, they're just 5,000 feet from their assigned altitude. But then, in a split second, everything changes.
Okay, so what about this British Airways Flight 5309? As you can see, the plane, right, had its windscreen changed before the night before, right, the night before flight. So up in the air, right, the windscreen was detached from the frame, and then the cabin was depressurized, and then the pilot was sucked out as seen from the video, right? So what actually happened to this British Airways Flight 5309? As you can see here, these are the findings. You can see here the boats were wrong, right? The boats that fitted the windscreen was wrong, right? And investigation revealed that the boats were replaced on a like-for-like basis without reference to the maintenance documentation. So let's compare this, all right, with the definition of assumption. What we have there, accepting something which is true, all right? This links to the point of the boats, all right? The engineer accepted that the boats were correct without checking. Okay. Next thing, without proof or checking, which falls under here, without reference to the maintenance documentation. So you can see that this links to the point of links to the definition of assumption. Therefore, this case is purely based on assumption. The engineer assumed that the boats were correct. All right. He didn't foresee that actually they are wrong, which actually in the end result, right, passengers' lives were at stake. So if the engineer were to think it through, were to follow protocol, were to check on the maintenance manual, alright, his assumption will not lead to this end result, alright, which is an accident. Based on the four examples that I bring up, okay, the number, the stomachache, British Airways Flight 5309 and SQ006, you can see that all of these assumptions plays a part, right? And we have to follow instructions, follow protocols in order, okay, to avoid such things from happening. So I hope that as future engineers to be, or rather when we walk out of this room, okay, we learn that assumption can actually create an impact on ourselves, or rather, if more critical, have an impact on others. So next thing, you might want to ask me, why do we assume? Alright, after listening to what about assumption? I'll pass on the baton to Ivan and he'll go through deeper on topic on assumption. Thank you.
Alright everyone, thank you Xian. My name is Ivan. And now that we have heard how presently evident and prevalent this whole issue of assumption is, we as engineers or engineers to be have to consider this matter with a pinch of salt. Otherwise, a similar catastrophic event might actually occur. But before we go any further, allow me to make a disclaimer that not all assumptions are bad. In fact, there's a place for good assumptions. In fact, some of the medical discovery and scientific breakthroughs that we have today are found on the assumptions, on the basis of assumptions itself. Let's take the light bulb, for instance. It was probably the year 1879 when a man by the name of Thomas Edison actually discovered the light bulb out of 1,093 assumptions in itself. And today we are all beneficiaries, and this technology has been advanced and has been expanded in great length. In fact, the light bulb has been synonymous to one who has generated a brand new idea. Alright, so assumption is not necessarily bad. There's always a place for assumption. Assumption is wrong and bad. When it is done at the wrong time, at the wrong place, that will lead to wrong and dire consequences. And so why do people actually assume at the wrong time, at the wrong places? It all lies with one issue that we all have in our head. It is called the brain, or in other words, the neural system. The brain is a very powerful instrument. If you do not know, the brain is where decisions are made. The brain is where thinking patterns are developed and when emotions are being invoked into our daily life. And as powerful and strong as the brain is, it is able to commit mistakes as well. There's a tendency to make error as what better known as cognitive error. And today I'm going to touch on one cognitive error. It is called the confirmation bias. But before I explain and elaborate further about what the confirmation bias is, allow me to introduce some of the variables and factors that are attached and involved in this phenomenon. The first thing that you must understand is this word called disposition. So what is disposition? According to the definition, it is the predominant or prevailing tendency of one's spirit, a habitual inclination. It is being swayed towards a settled conclusion. And every one of us here in this place probably have a disposition when we come to school. Some of our disposition when we come to school is this, to do well academically. For some, it's to expand our social circle. For some, it's to do well in the sports level. So many of us here have different disposition, and it's not necessarily wrong. In fact, disposition helps us to stay motivated and keep track when we are down and low. But what is wrong with disposition? It is wrong when it falls or subjected itself under the influence of confirmation bias. So I'm going to explain what's confirmation bias right now. Confirmation bias, by definition, is a tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms one preconception, leading to statistical error. Meaning what? The way that you look at things, the way that you search for things, you do it by cherry picking. You do it with filtering in your eyes. Then you want to do everything to get your disposition, and you ignore what I meant by the word disconfirming evidences. The whole action of eliminating this word, disconfirming evidences, validate that one has fallen prey to confirmation bias. So what is disconfirming evidences? The definition of disconfirming evidences is this. It is things that is contrary or cut against the grain of one disposition. And the moment you eliminate that, the moment you remove that, that is when you fall prey or you validate the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias is best illustrated or best manifested in the SQ006 case in itself. Let's look at the slide. Apparently there was two runways in the airport itself, one that is right and one that is wrong. And the pilot, however, ended up or landed up at the wrong runway at that point of time, though that he assumed that he was the right runway. And as every good pilot, they have always said their objective is to take off as safe as possible and to get to their destination. And that is his disposition, and there's nothing wrong with it. However, there was a typhoon that was brewing up at that point of time. Emotion, the tension that was in the air, probably triggered the confirmation bias in itself. And the very fact that he actually eliminated the disconfirming evidences, which show that he shouldn't take off because he's on the wrong runway, that is actually suggested by the co-pilot that the PVD shows that you're on the wrong runway. He still ignored that, eliminated that, and continued to take off. And that in itself shows that the pilot has fallen prey to the confirmation bias. So how do we deal with that? I'm going to hand the time over to Shawn as he brings this whole presentation to a landing. Shawn, please.
Okay, thank you, Ivan, for sharing us some deep insights on cognitive errors that we as human beings face. So for the past 20 minutes or so, we have heard from my teammates' stories. We showed you some videos, and we explained to you what fatal assumption is all about. So as you can see from this slide, 3 words: assumption, studies, and protocol. So like what Ivan has mentioned about the invention of the light bulb, we have actually many pioneers like Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, who actually shaped our modern world. And through valid assumptions, there can be breakthroughs in our modern society. And through these breakthroughs, studies can be established, and organizations can actually set up protocols so that people like us as engineers can actually follow. And through this, I think we can actually minimize the risk of accidents or conflicts that we may face. Which brings me to my concluding part. So, for today's presentation, I would like to draw out some of the main learning points that I think you should take home after this. So for instance, as you have heard from my teammates, this was the main factor in the crash accident of SQ006. This is the primary flight display. The co-pilot saw this anomaly, sounded off to the more experienced pilot. However, the pilot just brushed it off aside, and he assumes that they are actually on the right runway, which is 05 right. But the co-pilot, out of respect, he just doesn't want to fight back. So in the end, the circumstance is that the plane took off on the wrong runway. It crashed into the construction equipment, and the consequence is that the fuselage broke off. There was a fire explosion, and unfortunately, innocent lives were lost. So, if you are in the co-pilot's shoe, what would you have done? Okay, so as young and aspiring bike engineers, I think you should have the courage to speak up. If you spot some errors, whether it's minor or major mistakes, you should learn to speak up to your senior colleagues or your senior engineers, because when lives are at stake, I think we can't fiddle about with such assumptions. Which brings me to my next learning point. As what Ivan has mentioned earlier, confirmation bias is when one person gathers or remembers information selectively and you interpret it in a biased manner. And I think as engineers, this is dangerously wrong, because every action has a reaction, and it can have very bad consequences. Like for the SQ006, lives were lost. Okay, so the right thing to do is, studies have been established for the past decades or centuries. Okay, and organizations have actually painstakingly set up protocols. Okay, and these protocols are actually guidelines for us as engineers to follow. And lastly, my concluding slide. So the key message here that I want everyone up here to bring back is, we should think deeper before you act. Because in Singapore's fast-paced society, our daily work is so routine, and we fail to spot small or big errors. So I think as engineers, we should think deeper before you act. And which brings me to a note, I shall conclude my presentation for today. Thank you. So this is the end of our presentation. So maybe you'd like to open the floor, and if you have any questions about our presentation, or maybe you'd like to share with us your experience similar to the case studies that we have discussed.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
You mentioned that confirmation bias is when added with assumptions, it will be a very dangerous thing, right? But how does one get to the stage where you want to start the confirmation bias in the first place? I mean, it can't be just purely environmental factors, can it?
Depends how you see it actually. Actually, what you mentioned is not to say that when you say get assumption and confirmation bias, how you relate them.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias actually is assumption in itself. Yeah. So.
But how do you get to the stage where, I mean, sometimes you use confirmation. No, sorry. Yeah. How do you develop this confirmation bias in the first place? It can't be purely because of environmental factors like the typhoon
Yes.
or
Okay.
the circumstance.
Yeah. So that's right. So apart from the environmental aspect in itself, I think one thing that is very clearly evident here in this case, right, was the pilot actually regard his past experiences that override what is logical at that point of time. Even with the engineer himself, which Jia just brought up, I think the engineer might not be the first time was on duty. And probably because he might be on duty for quite some time, even if I have the pilot as well, there are many flight hours in the very same plane. So they might actually assume that, in my past experiences, all these things has gone well. Even if I break the rule in the past, I managed to get away with it. So maybe that create a reference for them to take, and put that reference to how they're going to make a decision today. So assumption can be not just only be based on environmental, it could be based on past experiences or things that you have gathered knowledge before.
Okay, so what you just said applied very well to the pilot, but to the maintenance person for the British Airlines.
Yeah.
Could it be where does confirmation bias have a part to play? Because what he did was he used the wrong votes, correct?
Yep.
So he assumed that the votes he used was correct, but how true is that?
No, the fact of the matter is the vote is wrong, but he never checked one. So that means he already fall prey to confirmation bias already.
Could it have been simply like too tired and just...
Yeah, definitely. That's environmental as well, on the physical aspect. Yeah. Sometimes when you're tired, you have a tendency to want to make things fast and do things fast. And what Shawn mentioned just now, we are a fast-paced society, so to keep up with pace, sometimes we try to get shortcuts, to get things done in an efficient manner. But efficient manner might mean that we might compromise things as well. And compromising might mean this, that we don't check and we assume things. Yeah.
Okay, more to add on about the British Airlines flight, whatever. So what happened basically was, it was at night, and the maintenance engineer was also very tired. It was at night, so the visibility was very poor. So due to that, he made the mistake, which caused disaster.
So what are a certain few things that could you have done to reduce this confirmation bias?
Follow protocol.
He's too tired to
Education.
That really determines it, because you sign for the job, and the job required to do that.
Yeah, but maybe it can be a higher up level, it can change the policies and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I think that one is out of our topic really. Yeah.
So any other questions?
So you attribute the whole accident to making false assumptions.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
In what way is it related to the issue of communication?
That means sometimes we can assume things, based on another conversation that was made. We could actually assume that the person means something when the person means another thing. So in that in itself, shows that assumption can play when we are changing words as well. Yeah, and sometimes an argument takes place because of words that was misinterpreted.
So the accident that happened has nothing to do with miscommunication.
It has. Yeah.
I think it's both, because the communication between the co-pilot and the pilot, right? That's the communication problem. However, this leads to assumption, which then happen, the accident. But the communication that we are talking about here is that the co-pilot to the pilot itself.
I think the content of the conversation or communication is also not entirely 100%. You see, like the air traffic controller, he says that he clarifies with the pilot that the 747 was on 5 right? But actually, visually, you can't even see the plane at all. So in that case, even you have perfect communication, but if the content of communication is really wrong by making wrong assumptions, then lives were at stake and innocent lives are lost just because of this assumption.
For SQ006, you all brought up the interview with the pilot, but in a circumstance like this, I think the air traffic controller will have been interviewed as well. So how did you respond?
The investigator did not really interview the ATC.
I think I watched the whole documentary video. So actually, they didn't interview the ATC, right? But the investigator went to the tower itself and actually went to, the simulation that Xian explained. The investigator went up to the tower and actually tried to see if they can actually see the plane that is on the right runway, but actually they couldn't in the typhoon condition, rainy condition. So
The typhoon condition.
Yeah, but in that sense, then why does the ATC
exactly.
give the
So
Assumptions.
it's assumption. So the ATC actually confirmed with the pilot by assuming that the plane was on the 05, right?
Because as Victor mentioned, all three pilots were very experienced. So the ATC assumed that they were experienced enough not to make such mistakes. And the pilot himself actually had very extensive local knowledge. He flew, he has been flying in the airport.
Many hours. Usually the pilot will be more experienced.
And in that airport itself, he flew 200 times in 5 years. So he actually knows the road well. But due to the typhoon, the poor visibility, and there's no clear indication that the runway was closed. That's why he made a complaint.
Could they have made the decision to not fly in the typhoon weather?
Yeah,
What
definitely.
do you mean by
Because we have typhoons in after that. They were rushing to take off.
correct? Yes.
Was there is there an option, right, where the flight can actually be delayed?
Okay.
What
Yeah.
were the consequences of that?
So that's why every experienced pilot would know this, that if the weather condition grow worse, they will definitely be grounded. And like I say, every pilot in this position is to leave the airport. And at that point of time, I think he really wanted to leave the airport quite badly. So what happened was he ignored the very fact that that there were facts that shows that he was on the wrong runway. And I think this might be triggered because of the potential or the consequence that might happen if the weather continues to worsen. Yes. Yeah. That's a typical case that will happen.
In this case, actually, the crew actually did receive the weather information from the airport authorities. So actually, they are fully aware that the typhoon situation is getting worse. And as what my teammates had mentioned, the winds, the knots, right, the wind speed, right, yeah, crossing winds, they were actually taking note of it. But I think they were too cautious about that part, that they forgot that they make a major mistake by turning into the wrong runway. And when they were on the wrong runway, okay, they didn't know that it was wrong, but when they were ready to take off, right, even though the co-pilot saw that anomaly, actually their mindset is to actually just take off, because any further delays would result in a grounded flight.
Who do you think was most at fault? The aviation authority, the co-pilot, or the ATC? In your opinion?
No, he didn't.
Actually, like for me, like my slide said, actually the turning point was the pilot. So for our group, we really think that actually at that point of time, if the pilot didn't assume that, actually, despite the fact that the PVD was out of line, that means the beacon was slightly to the left, indicating that actually he was on the right runway. So actually, if at that moment, if the pilot said that, actually, shall we check with some other guys? Yeah, I think that will be avoided. So the main point here is that the pilot, just assume that the beacon was on the left, but he don't care about it, he just flew off. That's why the accident was. So that's our group's
And to add on maybe some facts, on that day the runway was heated up. Imagine a closed runway heated up, and there's no barrier to prevent any plane from entering. So I think there are a lot of factors that contributed to this serious accident. Not just the pilot crew, but also the ATC, air traffic controller, as well as the airport equipment, the runway line.
Then in that case, what kind of things that we can do to reduce the assumptions, especially for the ATC and the aviation authorities itself, rather than pilots? I mean, like we're talking about the pilots, then what are the assumptions we can?
So I think, there's always a place for assumptions. So like what I said, like example, some of us we take a subject like thermodynamic heat transfer. Then there are some formulas that we don't understand, alright, like 0.332 Nusselt number or something like that. We don't understand all these things, but all this was being experimented. And for our end, what we simply do, we just follow that simple protocol. Meaning there's already people that already done the job for the assuming part. So that means for us, for the people on duty at the point of time, I think what is very important is for us to follow the right protocol, especially when considering the fact that if we choose the wrong decision or we make the wrong decision, life can be at loss. So the weighing factor, the cost opportunity factor here is very high. So in that sense, as high as it is, we must at all means, minimize it by actually following the protocol. If every one of us follow protocol, I think then definitely, this could be averted. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the discussion.
Intense.